one day in May was taken ill and died. And after she was dead, the will of course was read by the lawyer as we all stood by his side. To my brother it was found she had left £100, the same unto my sister I declare. But when it came to me, the lawyer said I see Granny.
Today is July 24th, 2009. We're in Burley, Idaho at the home of David Hanks, my uncle.
And my wife, Carolyn.
Carolyn, my aunt. Which is also the original homestead, with a few variations now, of my grandparents. We're talking about your helmet. When thoughts come about you, football is always one of those, and sports is a little more preeminent than your brothers. How come how'd your parents?
My parents thought it was a colossal waste of time, and I fought to stay out for football for one more night. And I stayed out for one more night for 4 years. And they required me to walk home from town, which is about 3 miles, and I had to get home in time to milk cows, because if I didn't get the chores done, that would jeopardize my playing.
Did your brothers ever feel like they were deprived?
I'm sure they did, but evidently they weren't as fired up about it as I was.
And how did you get fired up about it? Why did you? I mean, it sounds like it was almost a point of contention, or always.
Well, I used to listen when I could on Saturdays to all the football games on the radio. I knew everything about it, and now I kind of wonder if, when I read my patriarchal blessing, if it wasn't part of my life purpose that I was supposed to do, and I would have never taught school if I'd ever.
How do you make that connection with football and teaching school then?
Because I would have never got a job, and of course I was interested in coaching, but I wasn't interested in teaching, and then when I finally got to teaching, I found out that I could do it.
Well, the irony is that you gave up coaching before you gave up teaching, didn't you?
Yes, and when I gave up coaching, Norman Hurst, the superintendent of schools, says, well, we hired you to be the coach. If we hadn't hired you, we could have got a good science teacher.
There's a 19-year gap between you and Barbara, is there?
Well, about 18 and
18.
Something.
Yeah. Do you think you were raised differently than your siblings then?
Probably. Like I said, I was an irritating kid before I was 10 when they announced that your life is about to change, and they all worked very diligently to change it.
Who's they?
Well, I can't remember specifically, but just older siblings. I was the youngest of very dominant 7 siblings and 2 very dominant parents.
And yet, to my viewpoint, you're not a dominant personality now. You're soft-spoken, a little bit less forceful.
Well, have you ever seen the show The Three Faces of Eve?
I can't say that I have.
Well, I must have several different personalities. I figured up I had about 7 different ones, and nobody, including my wife, has seen all 7.
Is it a frightening thing to see any of the other 6?
Well, probably my worst side that I like the least is the one you see in church.
Okay. That does bring up some interesting things. We saw some of this with your brother Morgan. You know, fitting in has always been an issue for you, or being understood is especially a big issue for you, isn't it?
Yes, I never learned how to talk when I was a kid, because I was always told to hush up. Other people had things to say, so I remained silent and took it all in.
You're almost 74. Is it time for you to have a say? When you think about let's talk about your parents for a moment, and here. Your dad, farm, work, and then...
Dad was a workaholic. I've never seen a man that worked like him, unless it was his own dad. But he taught us how to work, but he never taught us how to play.
And do you feel like there was something missing in balance?
Yes, because my brothers could communicate with him, but I never could establish communications with him. Although I will say that Dad was a genuine person. There was nothing phony about him. What you saw is what you got.
So I take it you learned how to milk cows.
I learned how to milk cows.
What about crops and beets?
I hated them. And the livestock was so much pleasanter that I learned to like livestock.
Your mom's influence, it would seem like your poetic side
Come from her.
would have a more inclination towards
Well, I was
her.
closer to my mother. I could actually talk to her a bit.
And how much influence did that bit then change?
It had a
in your-
lot of influence. Probably my mother and my brother Morgan probably had the most influence anybody in the family. But, see, my mother was 44, I think, when she had me, and so when I grew up, my parents were really grandparents in a sense.
Do you think they had changed their parenting style at all? Just as a result? You know, we
Yeah.
tend to parent differently when we're with the last child than we do with the first.
Well, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't around to see their first parenting style, other than what I was told,
Yeah.
and I tried to copy some of it, and it was a vast mistake.
It does seem to be almost an eternal quest to find who we are and
Yeah.
what we're good at, doesn't it? When you think of your mom now, what thoughts come to mind?
Well, she used to read a lot, and she was very active. I think in the ward she must have had 4 or 5 jobs. After my dad was bishop, they wanted him on the high council, and he didn't want to do it right then. They said, well, if you don't do it, you'll never have another job in the church. And he didn't, but my mother did all sorts of stuff, including having plays and stuff. And
Well, Christmas programs and
stuff like that.
cantatas, and that seemed to always be. Yet musically, you are the least dominant of any of your siblings, it seems like. And yet there seem to be musical gifts there.
Well, I just never exhibited it in the family, and the family would have the sing fest, and I'd sit in the corner quietly, and I really didn't care for Hank's music, to be truthful with you, and they didn't care for the kind of music I like.
How would you describe the music you like?
My favorite music is jazz, and to the Hanks family, that's anathemia.
Yeah, I can understand that. So do you still, I mean, the Hanks music is English, it's Irish, it's
Well, when I went with
European.
my brother Morgan to Ireland, I saw my childhood there and all the Irish homes, and
Did you?
that was imported evidently by my dad, who was.
And even your dad's influence from his mission. Helen describes the tablecloth being very nice. You know, the
Yeah.
Irish tablecloth for bread and milk.
Yeah. Well, incidentally, bread and milk is still my favorite food if
Is
it's
it?
homemade bread, which I make myself.
But your dad was, if I have a memory, he made great bread himself.
Yeah, he did, because it soaked up so much milk.
Yes, and that's how you measure how good bread is,
Yeah, I
whether it
guess
could
so.
absorb milk.
Yeah, that's right.
The influence of your participating in sports changed your whole life, comparison to your siblings, especially.
Well, when I got through at college, Dad says, now that's all over, don't you realize what a waste of time it was? And I said, Dad, you haven't got a clue. You know, I learned more things in athletics that was beneficial to my life than I ever learned in the classroom. In fact, the things I taught in the classroom, I taught myself later on.
So it's fair to say your Hard Knocks, the School of Hard Knocks, has been really a great education for you.
The school, that was great education, plus my wife insisting we move to Montana when we did was one of the best things I ever did for our education and growth, because we got out of the dominance of the family and had to get off on our own.
Well, I understood you almost starved to death. Things were really tough in Montana for
We
you.
were for a while. I was making $200 a month, and I had 12 cows, and the guy I was working for said, we got lots of winter range, we'll put them on the winter range, and it'll cost you $10 a month. So I was bringing home, $80 a month, and had to pay about 30 of it for utilities, so we were living on about $50. And later on, I found out that the range that he was leasing from the government was costing him $1.63 per cow per year, so he was ripping me off.
He saw a profit margin.
Yes,
took
he
advantage
did.
of it. You look back on those times, though. Did they influence the way you and Carolyn lived?
Oh yes, and we got our children while we lived in Montana.
And they're both adopted children.
Yes,
Can
but
you
they are
tell
just
us
as
the story?
much my kids as if I'd have sired them. Just being the sperm donor doesn't make you the father. You have to do the raising, the nurturing.
Were you better at that than you think your dad was, as far as talking to him and having a relationship with him in that way?
Well, I had a great relationship with my daughter. I had a hard time talking to my son. I think history repeats itself.
I was curious as to why you gave Elizabeth the name that you did.
Well, because I liked your sister so much, your mother so much, excuse me. And Carolyn's mother was named Elizabeth.
Carolyn's cut from a different cloth, and that was what was attractive to you, wasn't it?
I don't know what. I just seemed like when I first saw her, I just knew, and in spite of all the youthful hormones and everything, I made a good choice in spite of.
Is it fair to
intellectual
call
part
you
of
guys
it.
pragmatic and maybe just a little different as far as the things that you enjoy? And
Definitely different.
you do have the Hank's laugh.
Yeah, I do. Well, they say you marry your mother or your sister, but I think I married myself.
That's a curious. And your wife taught school too.
Yeah, but she was scared to. When she was so shy, and when we first moved back to Idaho, she was to teach in Relief Society, and she couldn't do it very good. So my mother stepped in and teach for her and give her encouragement. And so my mother was kind of responsible for making her into a school teacher. And then when she got to teaching school, she found out she liked it.
Teaching was always a big deal to your mother, and she esteemed teachers who were good as almost divine, at another level. Is that fair?
I guess. I never realized that when I grew up.
But students have had you kind of, you were a different kind of teacher in the school.
Well, my philosophy is that you learn more while you're awake.
Okay. Well, that's probably pretty simple to back up. But you brought snakes in.
Yes.
You do.
Well, I tried to make my teaching as varied as I could, and I never did the same thing twice in a 2-week period.
So your lesson plan wasn't set once and then used over and over and over.
Well, not, I mean, maybe at a later date I'd do the same thing, but tried to vary it because everybody learns different, so.
When you were asked to be the speaker at graduation,
Scared the devil out of me.
did you feel honored though?
Oh yeah, but it scared me, and then I got through it because the librarian gave me 2 little orange pills that I took that's removed all the fear, and it was actually fun after
Were they
that.
placebos or?
There's something to that like. Something, no, they weren't placebos, but they were something that cut the tension.
Your decision to move and to buy the homestead.
It was
Can you
my
talk-
wife's,
That was your wife's?
because we were living in Bountiful, and she couldn't stand it because I had all the curtains closed all the time. I didn't.
No, is that when you were teaching at Woods Cross?
At Bountiful High School.
Oh, you taught about High School too?
I taught at Bountiful High School 2 years, and after the first year we moved here, and then I commuted to Bountiful High 1 year and then to Woods Cross High. So I drove in the dead of winter and the early Monday morning every week and come home Friday.
She was more comfortable with living with the memory and the legend and the responsibility, almost the burden.
Yes, this is having the place is nice, and it's a very pretty place, serene and peaceful, but it's also kind of a millstone because it's I don't really feel like it's totally mine. It's family.
You've tried. You've made changes though, but it's
Oh,
still
yeah.
not completely yours. Huh?
Doesn't seem why. The problem is, what do I do with it now when I'm about to die?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to put in the work that Carolyn and I put in on this. We probably put in 6 to 7 hours a day on the yard every day. That's
Well.
a full-time gardener's job.
Yeah, it's massive, massive, and just the number of trees alone
Yeah.
would be more than than anybody could realistically tackle. And then you have fruit trees, and you garden as well. You still garden, right?
Yes, but the garden's not down there. It's out here.
Oh,
now.
you've gone against the theme.
Well, we have the old garden is what we call the English garden
Oh.
because it's just all grass and trees.
Tell me where your love of wildlife came from and how that's evolved.
Probably genetic, and then when I was young, I used to get those Arm and Hammer bird cards, you know. You remember you never saw them, but when I was little, they used to put them out. My mother had a love of birds and things.
Your mother's poetry talks about trees in bloom and
Mhm.
idyllic settings, always. It
You know,
says
when
that.
I was in school, the English classes taught me that I couldn't write. And so I started writing after I went to a ecology workshop in McCall after I'd taught several years at Burley High School. And one of the requirements was you had to write 2 poems. And I was going to go home because I wasn't going to write 2 poems. But I did write 2 poems and found out I kind of liked it, and so all the way home I dictated poems to Carolyn to write down as we.
And the
back.
poems deal with everything, don't they?
Yeah.
There's some wildlife poetry, but there's also thoughts and meditation kind of poetry and reflection and insight.
Yeah. And then after the poetry, I started writing stuff, kind of stories, short stories.
Did you find that kind of fulfilled you or gave you a better definition of who you were to
Yes,
yourself?
yes. In fact, the fact that I write an article for the paper every week now. I was kind of coerced into that by June Tilley, but I find that it's very enjoyable. In fact, I got a year's articles written ahead
Oh,
of
really?
time, so I could go till next July without, if I were to die today, and Carolyn could send in an article.
Do you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea, or how does that
Sometimes,
evolve?
and rush to the computer and put it down. And a lot of times Carolyn gives me ideas. She says, write about this, so I go in and write about it.
Just off the cuff, you're able
Or
to do
else
it now.
she might give me the opening sentence or something. and
Really?
I go from there.
Are you to the point now where she can finish your sentences, or you can finish hers?
Well, I think she knows me pretty good.
How many years you been married now?
52 on December 13th. We got married on Friday the 13th.
Quite a change, huh?
Yeah.
It seems intriguing to me that you've almost become an animal stalker. I mean, I don't know many people who would drive to remote spots and camp out in the dark just to photograph something. Tell me how that happened and how it's kind of evolved. And is it the challenge? Is it the
Partly
what is-
challenge, partly the love of wildlife. I remember when I was teaching, I had a couple of students who wanted to build a reptile garden, so we put a reptile garden in the back of the room and put some snakes and stuff in it. So I decided there was a class advertised at Utah State about using animals in the classroom. So I thought, well, maybe I should go to that.
You're not bringing heifers into the classroom, are you?
Anyway, we went down there and we caught lizards and things, but one day we went bird watching and we went out on the marshes just west of Logan, and the first bird I saw was about this big and brown with a beak, and I said, what's that? And they said, a snipe. I said, you gotta be kidding, a snipe is a mythical Boy Scout bird. So that got me interested, and we come home, there was these birds that had a nest in the walnut tree there in the front of the
The
house.
black walnut tree?
And they had this pretty yellow breast and a gray head, and I couldn't figure out, I wanted to know what they were, and I finally found out that they were western kingbirds. And that got me going on looking at birds, and we finally bought a field guide and a few things, and that led to binoculars, which led to a camera, and then I started taking pictures in the summer when we were out of school, and then when I retired we got big time and the equipment got better all the time.
It's a unique personality that would camp out though for 5 to 6 hours just to take one, to have maybe a 2 second or 3 second period where you can take a shot, right?
True. Well, sometimes these occurrences happen once in your life and you better take care of them when you can.
You're kind of at home with these creatures though. I mean, I don't know a lot of people who could take pictures of bears, for example, close up and feel secure.
I'm not a good technician as far as the camera concerned. My best attribute is knowing the animals and being able to work. In fact, it always amazed me how people could live with livestock all their life and not understand how to handle them.
Do you handle livestock differently now than you did when you were a kid then?
No, I think I've always handled them kind of right. Probably a little better.
Do you talk to them?
Not a whole lot, but I'm very gentle around them. I don't rodeo them. My cattle are always very gentle.
Being such a big man, especially in high school, and being known for being big and strong, and that's such a gentle side now.
Well, it's been many years since I could lift the herd bull into the pickup.
But your brothers are big too.
Yes, they are. And my mother gave me a little complex. Says you're not as big as your brothers. You're little.
Well,
So I always thought of myself as little.
but Richard,
And I was little David. In fact, everybody in the Hanks family, my cousin and everything, always called me Little David.
the little David was probably one of the best athletes Burley High School ever had, wasn't he?
Well, thank you. That's
How
very
many
flattering.
touchdowns did you score as a senior on defense?
Just two.
Just
so.
2. And you got a scholarship to go to BYU.
Yes.
Why don't you talk about that? And
Well, probably the red helmet we were talking about. Did we talk about that earlier?
I don't think we talked about it on camera. You had a different helmet when you
Well, my second game of the year, before it started, I had a big crack in the helmet, which was white. And there happened to be a salesman there at the same time, and I had a large head, and that was the only helmet that fit me, and it was useless now. And he'd come in, he had some samples, and there was this red one that I formed an immediate attachment to, and it fit, so the coach let me wear it.
Who was
I
your
think
coach?
that
Was Budge?
Budge was a coach,
Gene Budge?
but I think that motivated me because they could spot me everywhere. And then the kids all felt kind of envious because they'd like to wear
How
it.
big were? What was your size there in high school?
In high school? Well, as a junior, I was 150 pounds, and then I grew up to about 200.
50-pound gain in 1 year.
Yeah. Well, you know, in your own family, you guys matured late.
Well, the problem is we matured this way as much. Yeah, that's
I
true.
did a lot of moving a sprinkler pipe, and sloshing through the spud fields and that, and bucking hay and that. That kind of built my legs and body up.
You were fast though.
Yeah, I was the fastest. I played tackle, but I could outrun all the backs on the high school team. But I didn't have the good hands like they had.
But when did you know you were good and that you could really excel? And how did you handle the adulation?
Never really thought about it. I never thought of myself as good till
It's interesting that, especially in today, when somebody, I mean, they're identified as being good from a really early age and kind of nurtured, and almost always fostered by the father or the mother, and yet you didn't have any of
Well, I
that.
sat on the bench till as a senior, so I didn't have a chance to pick up too much ego.
the lack of ego actually helped you a little bit,
Yes.
didn't it?
In fact, when I was a freshman and had all these kids lined up and they were putting together a team and they called my name to be on the first one, it quite startled me. But,
Do you ever have any question you were good enough to play college when you got to college?
no, not when I got there.
Just because you were able to size up people?
Yeah.
And,
I was able to compete. In fact, the Californians had come in, they couldn't believe that some hick from Idaho could play ahead of them.
Ironically, it wasn't all happily ever after for you in college.
Oh, I got to where I disliked football by the time I was a senior because there was so much negative and cussing and swearing and carrying on. The line coach was a real horse's hind end, and the coach, he was kind of a sourpuss.
But wrestling was a better experience for you.
Yes, because you were on your own, and the wrestling coach didn't know that much about wrestling, but he treated me like a human, and so he just left me alone, and I could do what I did.
That influenced the way you coached them.
Oh
didn't it?
yes, definitely.
You were probably less prone to criticize.
I didn't criticize at all. What good is criticism? Criticism doesn't. There's no such thing as constructive criticism. You can coach and suggest things that help your performance better, but you can't criticize and get things done. And I'm surprised that coaches don't learn that. So many coaches destroy kids.
Well, because it's their ego that gets in the way. Isn't
That's
it?
right. There you go.
How would 50 years from now, you know, what happens? John always talks about how long memory lasts. I mean, there's some concern that the Hanks name will carry on because there aren't a lot of male Hankses from.
Well, what difference does it make whether it
No, it
carries
doesn't.
on or not?
It doesn't.
Because
It's just-
most people are
it's just
not
a
really
matter of
interested
fact.
in only their own little circle.
See, it has been kind of interesting to be in Davis County where, you know, Emmanuel Hanks came over to Davis County Bountiful and see the original homestead there in Clearfield. Do you have any memories at all of your grandfather Hanks?
Just a weird old man that was always running off on the highway.
Was that when he had, was it Parkinson's or Alzheimer's?
I don't
at the
know
end
what
of his
he
life?
had.
It would.
They always attributed it that he had a automobile accident on his golden wedding, but I think it went deeper than that. It must have been something.
What about what about your grandpa Abrams?
I never knew him much. I was little and he died, but thing I remember is that big bushy mustache and it always had food in it.
Oh, that's a warm memory, I'm sure. This is my mother's 90th year celebration.
Well, my earliest memory involves her mother, and she was carrying me, and she had on some type of shoes that made a kind of a pleasant squeak as we walked down the road. And the road was gravel in them days, and I remember her carrying me and those shoes squeaking, and she was kind of mothering me around and stuff.
Barbara was always outdoorsy, and my mother was more of a domestic, quieter.
Yes.
So, do you have any other memories of my mother, you know, and watching, because she was older? And
She was
older.
gone most of my life, but I do remember one thing from my kids that used to go up there for piano lessons, like Brian,
Oh, did he take piano lessons
for a little while, but he kind of liked to go there because after the lesson was over, she'd always give him a toy, one of you kids' toy, now that you were grown up and gone, that you didn't need anymore. She'd give him a toy.
Is that where my baseball cards went?
It might have been, I don't know. And then I remember your dad telling me once, he said he really didn't know what he would do if he hadn't had your mother to make things work. He'd have been in real trouble.
I think that's a fair statement. Absolutely a fair statement. How would you like your kids to remember you and your grandkids?
With love. I have a good relationship with my grandkids. I had no relationship with my grandparents or anybody, so Of course, I've only got 3, so it's not that hard.
But you know their names and their birthdays.
Well, I'm very close to them, and I have a son on a mission in Costa Rica, a grandson on a mission in Costa Rica right now, and we write to him every once a week. Carolyn writes once a week, and I write every other week. We alternate weeks.
You ever feel different because you didn't serve a mission?
I always felt kind of guilty, but I broke my wrist my sophomore year in college, and so I had heavy pressure from my folks to go on a mission, and I didn't want to go. I always felt guilty, but I said, okay, I'll go, but they wouldn't take me, and I was so relieved because when I played, going on the mission, you just forget anymore college athletics. It isn't like it is now. And so I think maybe I've often wondered if the Lord had a hand in that because He wanted me to play football. If I hadn't, my patriarchal blessing said my mission in life is to be an influence on the youth of Zion, and I think that meant everybody, including the non-Mormons as well as the Mormons, and I would have never done that if I hadn't participated in college athletics.
It's interesting to hear you. You've spoken to me before about when Morgan went to war. You absolutely knew he was coming
I
home.
had perfect faith that my brothers would all come home safe during the war. I wish I could have that faith now, because that was absolutely 100% perfect faith. Not a doubt in my mind that they'd survive, and I wonder if that helped.
How has your faith evolved over the years then, as far as your experiences and part of it is our struggles?
Well, there's probably a dozen principles of the gospel that I think are so obviously true that they're irrefutable, and I guess that's what I hang my testimony on. A lot of the other stuff I don't always subscribe to. I know my brother Morgan used to say you got to separate church policy from gospel principle. I think that's an important thing.
Is it true that secretly they're going to put you in a suit when you're gone?
I hope not. I just leave me buried naked. In fact, I don't even think I want a funeral, but I guess I won't have much to do with it when I'm dead.
Well, I think your 3 grandkids and your 2 kids will have something to say to that.
I'm sure they will.
And maybe even Carolyn.
Maybe, if she outlives me.
And if you were to give a special message to my mother on her 90th, what would you say?
Well, I would say that she's always been very important in my life, and that's one reason why I've been so close to you Clark kids, is because of my respect and love for your mother, and I hope that she has a very happy 90th birthday, has more than that to come.
Well done. Thank you.